Allie, and today is my birthday, yay! And I dare you to guess my age. In real life, people seem to be surprised every time I tell them how old I am, so I'd love to hear what you guys out in booktube land would guess. So don't worry, I won't be offended. If you want to make a guess, put it down in the comments and let's just play a little game. It's all for fun. Take your best guess. And in honor of my birthday, I would like to do this video to share with you some of my reading tastes, and along with that, some of my favorite books that I would recommend from those categories. And I say categories, not genres, because the categories I'm going to say aren't like the typical genres you'd find in stores, so they're kind of more overall themes that can pull from other genres, and so that's why I'm just going to say these categories. So the first category is adventure books, and a lot of these can be from sci-fi or fantasy. I tend to lean more towards middle grade and young adult for this category because I think a good coming of age story really lends itself to an adventure. And so there's a ton of ones I could recommend. I mean, one could be Harry Potter, but I'm not going to recommend Harry Potter to you because if you haven't read Harry Potter yet, with how prevalent it is, me recommending it is probably not going to do anything. So instead, I'm going to recommend one of my favorite authors of middle grade fantasy, and that's Shannon Hale. And she does write adult books and some children's books and graphic novels and things like that, but my favorite of hers are her middle grade fantasies. And some of them are, she has a series called The Books of Bayern, which starts with Goose Girl, and there's 4 books in that series. And then she has the Princess Academy trilogy, but my absolute favorite of her books is Book of 1,000 Days. And this is about a girl named Dashti who is a maid, and she is the maid to Lady Sauron, who is also a young woman. They're both teens. And Sauron gets upsets her father by refusing to marry Lord Krakauer, who is this older rich man that the father would have an advantageous marriage from, and she refuses because he's a mean, terrible man. And because of that, the father traps both Lady Sauron and Dashti into a tower, and they're supposed to be there, I think, for like 7 years, just like that is what their sentence is. And so this story is all from Dashti's point of view. It's all written in her journal writings, and so they'll have like all the days and all that. She also draws pictures. This is a picture of their little cat that comes into the story at one point, which he's a cute little addition to the story. And it's really about Dashti and her story of courage and loyalty and just hope in a basically hopeless situation of being in this tower where they have no way of seeing the outside. They don't know what's happening in the world, and they're there for a really long time, and just her day-to-day dealing with that and what happens after and the adventure that they end up going on later in time. So I love this book. I've probably read it at least 10 times. It's like the book I pick up when I just need something cute and fun to get me through a rough patch or something like that. I mean, it's really easy to read. You could read it in a couple days. And then my next category is mysteries, because when I tend to go towards adult, I tend to like the mystery thriller side. And my favorite mysteries are the Charles Lennox mysteries, which are by Charles Finch. And this is the first one, A Beautiful Blue Death. I don't know how many he has out. I've read 7 of them, and I know there's some more, but I don't know the total amount. So this first one is where we meet Charles Lennox, who's a Victorian gentleman. And of course, being a rich man in those times, he's supposed to just be a man that lives a life of leisure or maybe joins Parliament. But he has decided to be a private investigator, which everybody kind of looks down upon that he's decided to do this. And so each book is like a new mystery that he solves. This one is he solves a mystery from his neighbor, who is a lifelong friend of his, Lady Jane. One of her servants supposedly commits suicide, but she doesn't believe it's suicide. And so Charles is asked to help figure out what happened. And then a bunch of other stuff happens and leads from there, from him investigating that. And I just love that these books kind of delve past the mystery and really like talk about Victorian times, his life in London, his relationship with his friend Lady Jane, And also my favorite relationship in this book is with him and his butler named Graham, and you can tell through the book that they are really close friends and they have a real respect for each other and a close relationship, but because of the society they live in, they still have to keep their level of, you know, Graham is still a servant to Charles, and you see all that and the way he is still treated as a servant, but at the same time, Charles tells him all of his, like, secrets and talks to him about cases and stuff like that, and so it kind of, like, is a weird relationship on how they can get past the etiquette of the time, but still stay in it. And so I love these mysteries. They're kind of a little slow moving. I mean, there always is action, but it really is a character delving into him and the people in his life. And when I got to about the 4th book, I started to get a little, like, bored of the same setup. But then the 5th book, A Barrel at Sea, completely turns it on the head and got me refreshed again, because this takes place completely on a ship at sea. And so it's still Charles Lennox, but has a whole new cast of characters because it's the people that are on the ship, because something happens while he's on this trip. And so he has to help the people on the ship solve a mystery. So that rejuvenated my interest in the series, and so now I'm back in and wanting to keep going at it. The other mystery that I really recommend is The Hound of Baskerville by I'm about to say by Sherlock Holmes, but it's a Sherlock Holmes book by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And this is the book where Sherlock is asked to come to the home of the Baskerville family because the head of the manor is dies, and some think it's a heart attack, but there's also a curse in the family that there's a hound that haunts the Baskervilles throughout his ancestors, and so Sherlock is there to solve the mystery. And this is the first one of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries I had ever read, and I always shied away from it because I thought, it being written a long time ago, that the language would be hard to understand, that I wouldn't get into it, but I found it really easy to read and enjoyable. I really like the relationship between Sherlock and Watson, and you can really, like, see it from both sides in this, because some of it comes from Sherlock's point of view and some of it comes from Watson and kind of their interactions. And, like, since it is an older book, there's not a lot of action. It kind of takes a while to get to the, like, mystery at the end, but I just think it was really fascinating to read, and I ended up buying the whole set because I wanted to read the rest of the Sherlock books. So if you ever were wondering if you wanted to start and read them, I like starting with this one. Some people start at the first one, which is A Study in Scarlet, but I've heard people give mixed reviews on that one, and I thought this was a really enjoyable one to start out on, and then got me inspired to read the rest. And I know I just showed, like, 2 mysteries that don't take place in modern time. And I do read modern mysteries, but the problem is that usually I'll be really in a mystery, I'll enjoy it, but then 2 months later I'll completely forget what happened. So I couldn't, like, think back on which modern mysteries, like, I really enjoyed and wanted to recommend, because they've all, like, flown out of my head. So now that I'm keeping track of them on Goodreads, maybe I can remember them from now on. So another category I really like is romance, and I go for kind of like the cuter romance, not like on the erotica side. I'm more on the, like, innocent, fun, like, first love kind of side. So in terms of, like, YA, my favorite romance author is Kasie West, and this is the fill-in boyfriend, and I like all of her, so I'm not going to specifically say this is the one to read. Like, any of them I enjoy, and I kind of feel like they're all on the same par. They're just cute romances, kind of first love stories, and there's usually a little more into the family and all that, so I like her as an author. And then on the adult side, my favorite romance author is Sarah Addison Allen, and what I love about her is that she always puts a little magical realism in her stories. So this story specifically is my favorite. This is Garden Spells, and this is about a family called the Waverleys, and they live in North Carolina, and it's all the women in this family. And so the main character is Claire, and so they all kind of have magical gifts. And so Claire, she's a cook and a caterer, and one of the things is when she uses plants and herbs from her garden, it always infuses some kind of feeling in the person that eats it. So people will order her catering specifically to maybe make people feel jealous of their beautiful house, or to feel relaxed, or whatever. They want to incite a certain feeling in their people. So Claire, that's her ability. And then she has, I think it's a cousin, an elderly cousin, it's an older woman who just mysteriously feels like she has to give things to people, and so she'll give somebody a gift, and then it'll turn out that is something they really needed, but it's something totally random. And then the story takes place when Claire's sister, who has been away for a long time, comes back to live with them with her daughter, who I don't think Claire's ever met. And the daughter, Bay, is just so sweet. The little girl has like kind of a relationship with the apple tree in the backyard, which sounds weird, but it's magical in the book, like just their interaction, Bay and this tree, and how they kind of grow together throughout the book. So it's a really nice story about women. It is a romance and has that little bit of magical realism in there that I love. And all of her books have a little magical realism in it. I love them. The next category this is a real genre that I like, is nonfiction. And one of my favorite nonfiction books that I've read in the last few years is Left to Tell by Immaculee Ilibagiza, or Ilibagiza, that's right. And this is about a woman, Immaculee, who survived through the Rwandan genocide. And so during that time, she hid with 7 other women inside a small little bathroom. And I think they were in there for like 90 days or something like that. And so it's her time during the genocide and how she survived through, it is a lot about her faith. So she relied on her faith during her time there. I mean, can you imagine like being in this tiny little room? And there were times in this book where she could hear outside the people calling her name specifically, looking for her to kill her. And these are people that she grew up with, people that used to be in her class, neighbors. And this book is a hard book to read. Like, even though I recommend it, I didn't just sit down and read this book. Like, this took me a long time to read, because I would read like a couple chapters and then I had to put it down, because these are like neighbors and friends just turned like murderers and killing each other. And it is really heartbreaking, but I think it's important to read about these times in history. It's like reading a Holocaust book. You need to read about these times when horrible things happen so that we don't repeat them, because this especially, you can see how things led to this. So she talks a little bit about the buildup and living in the country beforehand, and how this all led to this mass genocide. Like, it's important to know how things get to where they are. The other nonfiction that I really like is Under the Banner of Heaven by Jon Krakauer. And this is, it's sort of about the Mormon church, but it's not about the Mormon church that's like the current general church. It's about fundamentalist Mormons. And so it's ones that have kind of gone away from the general church and are being a little more extreme. And so these are the ones that would be polygamist and things like that. So stuff that the general Mormon church wouldn't approve of and support. And so it does delve into the beginning of the Mormon church, and then how these fundamentalist groups split off from the regular church. And then he's specifically talking about a murder that happened, that 2 brothers who are fundamentalist Mormons, and how they committed a murder. They murdered a woman and her daughter, a baby girl, and they said that God told them to do it. So it delves into religion and how someone can use religion as an excuse to do horrible things, and how you get to that point in your life. Like, were they raised and taught to get to the point where they would say God made them kill a baby and a woman? Like, so there's some hard parts in this to read too, because you do learn about the specifics of the murder, which is hard. But I really found it interesting to learn about the beginnings of the Mormon church, but then also to learn about how people could split off from a regular common religion into a more radical version of it. And so I would recommend this book. It was really interesting. And then my last kind of theme is that I really like fiction that is emotional. And so a lot of times this is things that would fit into a literary fiction, but is kind of nebulous because it would have to be emotional to me. And so an example for me, one that I read in the last couple of years, is The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman. And this is about a couple who the husband is a lighthouse keeper, and they live on a tiny island off of Australia. So they're the only two people that live on this island, and they're running the lighthouse. And the woman, the wife, Isabel, she just wants to have a child and wants them to have a family on this island. And it's about their story of like complications with fertility and pregnancy, and it's so emotional. It was so emotional for me because I read this book right after, like probably within a year or two after I found out that I wouldn't be able to have children naturally. And so it really hit me personally, that like grief when you find out you can't become pregnant, or like in this one she has miscarriages. So like losing a baby, like fertility and miscarriages is such an emotional topic for somebody that's gone through it. But it also was cathartic to hear about somebody else's story that's going through the same struggles and like that yearning to have a child. And in this book, she doesn't have a lot of options. She doesn't have a lot of the options of adoption like we did. And I mean, because they're off in the middle of nowhere. They only come to shore every couple years. And just that like pain. And so some of the decisions she makes. So what happens in the book is that one day a boat comes up to shore, and it has, in the boat there's a dead man and a living baby. And it's the choice of what to do with the baby. Do they tell the people on shore that they found this baby, or do they just, since people never see them, do they just pretend the baby is theirs? And so just all the moral implications in that, all the like choices that they have to make, and the grief that she has to go through, and the husband too. And just, it's very emotional, and it especially was emotional to me because of the fact that it revolved around fertility and all those desires to have a family. And I find that like when stories can do those things for you, where you're going through something hard in your life, and I can't just like keep it inside of me. I talked about it a lot when we were going through infertility, and I found that that was something that really helped other people to be able to tell their story. Me going first and telling my story brought out all these other people's stories. I never really heard about people going through the infertility that were having miscarriages, because people keep that stuff so private into themselves, but sometimes that can eat away at you, especially if you don't go to somebody for help. And sometimes you just have to be the first one to tell your story, and then somebody else will tell their story. And by reading fictional stories or even nonfiction memoirs and things like that, you can have that ability to share that story or hear somebody else's story. Know you're not alone. And then the last one, I don't have a physical copy of this. Other than literary fiction, I often find emotional stories inside of plays. I read a lot of plays because I do a lot of community theater, and so I'll read all the plays that we perform at the theater, and then other ones by the same authors. And the play I read recently, which was Jake's Women by Neil Simon. And Neil Simon, I'm sure you've heard of him. He is famous for The Odd Couple and Barefoot in the Park. He does often comedies, and that's what he's known for, is his comedic ability. But this play was not like your normal Neil Simon play. It was very emotional, and going into the inside workings of this one man. So it's just one man and then a bunch of women. So this man, Jake, is a writer, and he spends his time either writing or kind of creating conversations with the women in his life. So he'll have conversations with his sister, or with his ex-wife that passed away, or his daughter when she was 12, or his daughter now that she's 21, and he just like brings them to life on stage to talk to. So on stage you're seeing them talk to each other, but it's all in his head. And then at the same time that he's having all these imaginary conversations that he's writing in his mind, he and his wife, his current wife, are having this whole discussion about the like breakdown of their marriage. And so it's really emotional story about him and his wife and what they're going through, and how he goes to the other women in his life, even if it's just in his mind. He uses these other women to help him through this time and to figure out how to save his marriage and how to move on and forgive and get past all the struggles of a collapsing marriage. And so it's really emotional. You see him throughout the play starting to fall apart and how he picks up the pieces, and then just emotional scenes between him and his wife. And it's really also emotional to see the scenes with his dead wife, obviously, because there's a lot of unresolved things because she died suddenly. So he wasn't able to tell her all the things that he wanted to. So there's all those conversations too. So I really recommend it if you like to read plays. I thought that was it has funny parts in it since it is Neil Simon, but it also is really emotional. So those are my favorite authors and books. So if you have ones that you would like to recommend for me, like some of your favorites, I would love to hear them and try new things. All right, thanks. See you later.